Hey good folks, I'm here for AE Tuts Plus, and today I've got something very sweet for you. Remember that Hypno pre-compilator alien sort of thing from the metal tutorials? Well, I was very curious of how they created it, and the good folks at Metal was kind enough to reveal the techniques which they used to create this Hypno pre-compilator. We'll start from scratch and see how they created it. So here's how we're going to do it. We're going to create three maps. A color map, from which we'll extrude the Hypno pre-compilator. We're going to create a displacement map, which we'll use to displace it. And we're going to create a reflection map, which is going to contain our reflections, obviously. Okay, so now let's start by creating the color map. We'll create a new composition, Control N, and we'll make it 1024 by 1024, 25 frames per second frame rate, and we'll call it color map base. We'll start by creating a new solid, Control Y. Color doesn't matter at the moment. We'll add a ramp effect to it. We're gonna switch the black and whites. We're gonna set the start color to white and the end color to black. Then we're gonna switch the ramp shape to radial, and we'll set the start of ramp at exactly the middle of the composition, which is 512 by 512. To this we'll add levels effect. Increase the gamma by grabbing onto the middle arrow and dragging it to the left, so we get a more distinct circle here. We'll add a nice round circle by just double clicking on the mask. Let's display the action safe borders for a second by alt clicking and hitting this little button. So the inner rectangle is the title safe and the outer rectangle is the action safe. And we'll hit MM and we'll set the mask expansion just to the borders of the action safe. Now we'll call this layer background and we'll call it good and we'll move on. Now let's create a new adjustment layer, Control Alt Y, and we'll call it blur, and we'll add a fast blur to it. We'll blur it by approximately 65. Okay. Next we'll add the metal texture. In our assets under stills we have the softbox reflect 2. We'll drag it in and we'll scale it to the comp size, so Control Alt F. We'll set its opacity to approximately 70%. And we'll set its transfer mode to multiply, which is here. Now we'll add an adjustment layer, Control Alt Y, call it levels, and we'll add levels to it. And once again we want to increase the gamma just a tag, just to brighten things up here. The last thing for the column base, we'll add a nice ring. So we'll add a new shape layer, right click on the blank space here, go to New, Shape Layer, and we'll call it ring. When you're using shape layers, you can get more precise with the shapes you want to use. Here's how. You go to add and hit the little arrow here. We'll choose ellipse, toggle the ellipse path, and we'll set the size. Right now it's 100 pixels by 100 pixels, and we'll set it to 700 by 700. And we'll add a stroke to it. At the moment it's blank, there's no fill and no stroke to it. We'll add a stroke by again clicking on the arrow next to the add a stroke, and we'll make sure the stroke is a nice light blue, something like this should be fine. We'll set the opacity to 65. The stroke width will be 20. Now let's blur it out of it. We'll add a fast blur to it, and we'll blur it by 12. So that's the color map base. Now let's go to project and drag the comp map base composition to this little composition button. That will create another composition, same size. Rename it to color map. So the color map should be half the size of the color map base. So let's hit Control K. We'll lock the aspect ratio. If you suck at math as much as I do, we'll just let After Effects do the calculation. So we'll hit divide by 2, and there you go. And just again Control Alt F to set the layer to the comp size, or you can just set the scale to 50%. Next, let's create a new adjustment layer, Control Alt Y. We'll call it levels. We'll add levels to our layer. In the channel section, we'll switch it to red and we'll decrease the gamma a bit. So we'll get a more bluish look. We'll leave the green as it is and we'll switch to the blue. There we'll increase the gamma a bit. Okay, now in our project under stills we have the marble picture. We'll drag it in, and of course it's enormous, so we don't need it that big. We'll set a scale to 20, and now we need to mask out the white section, which we don't need. I'm clicking on the left mouse button, and while clicking Alt Control Shift and dragging the mask, I'll get a perfect mask straight in the middle. Perfect round mask. Now let's set the mask to none so we can see it, and double click on one of those vertices. Just drag all the edges to the edge of the marble. Mind just the rectangle edge, not the mask edge itself. So we'll switch it back to add. Since we left the title safe, action safe, we still have the cross in the middle, so we can use it to center our marble. This will be our eye, and we'll add to it hue and saturation effect, and we'll set the master hue to -160, so we'll get a nice blue purple sort of thing. Now we'll add a new solid, Control Y, and we'll make it grayish blue, and we'll call it blue solid. Let's set the opacity to 50 so we can see what we're doing here. We'll add a round mask to it by double clicking on the ellipse tool, hit double M. We'll set the expansion just to the inner part of the ring of the color map base. Set the opacity back to 100, and we'll set the transfer mode to hard light. Now we'll add another ring. We'll create a new shape layer. Once again, right click, new shape layer. We'll call it ring. We'll click on the little arrow next to add. We'll add an ellipse, and we'll set the ellipse size to 150, so it will give us a nice edge to the marble. And we'll add a stroke to it. Stroke, and make sure the stroke is 4 pixels wide, and we'll set it to blue, so this short should be fine. We will set the layer to multiply. Now we'll create another shape layer, or we can just duplicate this one and rename it to pupil. Now let's open its properties. Open content, ellipse path, and we'll set the size to 50 by 50. We don't want any strokes, so we'll delete the stroke and we'll add a fill. Set the fill to black. We don't want any transfer mode here. And that will be our pupil. Last but not least, we'll add a new adjustment layer. Control Alt Y. We'll call it bulge. And to it we'll add a bulge effect. Now here's the settings for the bulge. We'll set the horizontal and the vertical radius both to 70. Maybe even 73. That will give us a nice distortion for the eye. It looks a bit better this way, I think. Yeah. Alright. That's it for the color map. We can actually now take this color map and extrude it using the shape shifter. But before we do that, let's create all 3 maps, and then we can move on to assembling them into the Hypno pre-compilator. We'll create a new composition. Control N, 512 by 512. And we'll call it reflection map. Right, to our reflection map, we'll drag our Nancy office picture. We'll need to fit comp height, so we'll hit Control Alt Shift G, which will set it to fit composition height. By the way, if you would hit Control Alt Shift H, it would set it to fit control width. But we need the composition height, so Control Alt Shift G. On top of it, we'll set the metal texture. We'll hit Control Alt F to set the size exactly the same size as our composition. And we'll set the transfer mode to hard light. And we'll add on top of it all, Control Alt Y, an adjustment layer. We'll call it blur. And we'll add a nice fast blur. and we'll set the blurriness amount to 8. So that will be our reflection map. Let's set repeat edge pixel. Let's move on to the displacement mapping. Now the displacement mapping is going to be very similar to the color map. Let's create a new composition, Control N. We'll make it once again 1024 by 1024. We'll call it displacement map base. So to create, we'll start creating a new solid, Control Y. Color doesn't matter, we'll call it background. We need to create a round mask for it, so let's switch to round mask or ellipse tool. We'll double click on the ellipse tool, which will give us a nice perfect round mask. And we'll add a ramp effect. Set the start color to white and the end color to black. Switch the ramp shape to radial. Set the start of ramp straight in the middle, so 512 on 512. We'll set the end of ramp to approximately 1005, so just on the edge of the shape. We'll add to this a levels effect, and once again we want to increase the gamma by dragging the middle arrow to the left. Somewhere this should be fine. Now if we would hit MM, we can lower the expansion to where the edges of the shape is reaching the, well, actually let's switch to alpha view. We need the edges to be almost at the edge of these points of the action safe. Okay, now let's create a new adjustment layer. Control Alt Y to create an adjustment layer. We'll call it blur, and we'll add to it a fast blur. And we'll set the blurriness to 65. Now we'll create a nice outer ring. We're gonna create two rings here, an outer ring and an inner ring. So to create the outer ring, we'll add a new shape layer. Right click, new shape layer. We'll rename it to outer ring. Now remember, this is a displacement map, so that means it will be entirely black and white. And the grading between the black and the white, the different shades of gray, will determine how much displacement we will see in the final composition. Let's scroll it down and click on the little arrow next to add. We'll add an ellipse. Toggle it down, we'll make it 980 pixels by 980. Maybe 980 is too much, let's set it to 960. Now let's add a stroke to it. Add stroke. We'll set the stroke to 15 and we'll set its color to black. And we'll add a fast blur to it with the amount of 15 for the blurriness. Now we'll create a new adjustment layer. Actually, we can just duplicate this one and we'll rename it to dashes, which is exactly what we're going to do. So let's toggle it down, open the content and the ellipse path. We'll set the size to 920 and we'll set the stroke to be approximately 85 or maybe even less, 82. Yeah, it should be fine. Let's reduce the blur. Let's reduce the blur from 15 to approximately 3. And if we'll hit the little plus button next to the dashes, we'll get dashes. And we'll set the amount of dashes to 85. So we'll get this nice thing going on here. It will look very, very cool on the final composition. So we do want to have some ramp here, so we'll add a ramp to it. I know we can add a gradient stroke, but I find the ramp a bit easier to handle. So we'll set it to 512 and we'll drag the end color. Then we'll get something of this sort. It should be fine. Nice transition from black to white, a very subtle transition. And we'll set the opacity, let's hit T, we'll set the opacity to 25. You might remember the Hypno pre-compilator had this sort of wings here, 3 wings that revolve around the middle eye. Let's create those wings. Duplicate this layer and we'll call it wings bottom. Let's for a moment there get rid of these effects and toggle it down, open the content, open the ellipse path. We'll set the size to 800 and open up stroke. Let's set the stroke width to 215 pixels. So we'll get a nice large wings here, and we'll set the dashes to 400. Not 40, but 400. Okay, so we get these nice wings here, which you can just imagine how it would look if we would start rotating it. How nice is that? Bring back the ramp, and we'll set the fast blur to not 3 but 13, and we'll set the opacity back to 100. Let's see, the ramp is a bit too rough here, so let's do something like this, should be fine. Okay, duplicate this layer, and we'll call it wings top. And we're actually not going to do any changes here, but the reason I am using two identical layers is that if we'll open up this one for a second, let's open it up, go to stroke. If we'll animate the stroke width, we can create a nice blinking animation, which will come in very nice. Now, let's duplicate this layer once more and get rid of these effects for a second. We'll rename this layer to pupil. And let's toggle it down, open the content ellipse path. We'll set the size to 220 pixels. We actually don't want any stroke here. Let's delete that stroke and add a fill. The color really doesn't matter because we have the ramp on top of it. The ramp is a bit too rough. Let's set the black to a nice gray, and we'll get the end of ramp a bit closer than it is right now. This is nicer. We might have to switch the gray and white position. We'll see how it looks. Let's set the opacity to about 85. Now let's duplicate the outer ring and drag it on top, and we'll call it inner ring. And to our inner ring, let's toggle it down. Toggle down the content and the ellipse path. We'll set the size to 725. Let's make sure the stroke is a bit wider, let's say 20 pixels, and the fast blur should be a bit larger as well, let's say 25%, and we'll set its opacity to 25. I would like the radius a bit smaller till we get to the edges of the wings. Let's go into our project, drag it into pre-comps. Now let's once again drag it to the composition button. That would create another composition with it, and we'll rename it to displacement map. And all we need to do here is just add a nice ellipse mask to it, clip out the edges we don't need. We'll get a nice round edge, and I do believe this is it for the displacement. Now we're finished with all three maps. Let's go back to our main composition. Here, as you saw at the beginning of the tutorial, we have Nancy's office still image and three lights, which are just parallel lights. One is set to 140%, and these two are set to 90. Plain white color. All three of those are set in different positions. Now let's start building the Hypno precompilator. We'll drag in our color map. To it, we'll apply shapeshifter. Now here's the settings we're going to use. For the 3D extrusion, let's actually create a new camera, rotate it a bit so we can see how it looks. Okay, so thickness, we'll set it to 5, and jump right into our displacement mapping. We need our displacement map and reflection map as well in the composition. Let's drag it beneath everything, and we don't need to see them, so shut off the eye for them. Okay, now back to our color map and back to our shapeshifter. Under displacement map, displace layer will set to displacement map, and we'll set the displacement to 200. Pow, there it is. How crazy is that? Let's go to our reflection mapping and set the reflection layer to reflection map. And now let's go into material properties and adjust those a bit. We'll set the specularity to 30. We'll set the shininess to 3, and we'll set the reflectivity to 40%. Bring back some of the original colors. Now, this isn't exactly what we had in the original precompilator. If we do want to adjust it a bit, here's what we can do. First, let's go to our pupil and flip the colors in the start and end color. We'll set the end color to a nice gray and the start color to white. And let's drag it in a bit. The inner ring is a bit rough, so let's set the opacity to 10 maybe. We can make sure the background isn't that large. Let's set the scale a bit down. Now, if we'll add some animation here, let's say the dashes, let's give it some rotation. Let's say 10 seconds animation. We'll just make it rotate for, let's say those will rotate one circle, while the wings will parent the wings top to the wings bottom, and we'll animate the wings bottom to rotate half the amount of the dashes, but on the opposite side, so minus 180. And let's say that at this point we want to have this, we want to have the blink I was talking about. So let's toggle this down and set a keyframe for the stroke width. And actually let's make it 5 at 2.5. And at 2.10 we'll set the stroke width to be large. We'll give it 5 frames. Copy these keyframes, copy and paste it, and right click on them, keyframe assistant, time reverse keyframe. So we'll get a nice blink here. And we'll set the inner ring to do the same animation. We can just set the scale. So we'll scale it to approximately here. And then again, just copy these, paste them, and right click, keyframe assistant, time reverse keyframe. So we get this nice blink. We can have 2 blinks even. Let's say at this point we'll have another blink. Just copy, paste those keyframes. And let's see if we'll set the wings bottom ramp. Let's switch the black and whites here again. Just copy this ramp and paste it to the wings top. And we'll drag in our end of color. Let's copy this ramp and paste it to the wings bottom. This will give us another interesting look. Let's see how that looks. Let's have a quick preview of how that looks. Okay, so as you can see, it's not precisely the same as the Metal's shapeshifter. Frankly, it blew my mind when I first saw the Hypno pre-compilator, and I still think it's pretty amazing. I think it's a great example of thinking outside the box using shapeshifter. I would like to take this opportunity and once again thank the good folks over at Metal, especially Chris, who's a really stand-up guy. So cheers, Chris. So go out there and build your own alien Hypno pre-compilators. I've been yapping at you for these last 25 minutes or so. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Once again, my name is Ramel Abraham and I'll see you next time.